Hi, I'm Lex Epimacena with the Washington Hospitality Association, and today we have our friend Rick Braa of AMP Services, who's also the leader of our advisory network, leading today's webinar on financial strategies to survive during these very difficult times. And Rick, why don't you go ahead and start off telling us a little bit about yourselves. But before we get started, I want to let everybody know that this webinar is sponsored by US Bank, one of our good partners. And thank you to US Bank for your support. All right, Rick, it's all yours.
All right, so I'm Rick Braa. I'm the owner-operator of AMP Services in Seattle. We provide accounting services to primarily full-service and limited-service restaurants, groups primarily. So we have deep experience. We've got a couple hundred restaurants in about 22 states. So we're pretty deep into the space. We love the restaurant industry. We're dedicated to it, and we're here to make a difference. So I'll go ahead and kick off. How did we get here? So the first case of COVID-19 was announced in January of 2020. The first death was in February 29th. There's actually a couple of deaths prior to that time. Until mid-March, Washington had the highest number of confirmed cases and per capita in the United States. Governor Inslee issued a statewide stay-at-home order on March 23rd, and life changed dramatically for all of us. Then we entered our phased reopening, and physical distancing mandates closed or restricted dining, both indoors and outdoors. So we've had incredible structural changes to the industry, and they're causing a major disruption. Many of you have sales drops between 30 and 70%. Very difficult to deal with. So we've had a major disruption in the industry, and life won't be the same for probably a couple of years until we recover here. So I've outlined some strategies that I think could be helpful as you go throughout these at least the next 6 months in the foreseeable future. So the number one is to use all government programs. So the loan that I really like is the SBA EIDL loan, which is Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It's roughly $150,000, and it comes with a $10,000 grant. Now you can get the $10,000 grant without taking the $150,000. So I always advise everybody to apply for this. And this is per group. So if you're an affiliated group, you're not going to get a whole bunch of different loans unless they're separate ownership. So it's a 30-year loan, 3.75% with 1 year deferred payments. And you can use it for working capital due to the economic injury. So things like buying PPE or changing your dining room around, not using it for the same things as the PPP is, but using it for other things, pay bills, accounts payable, things that you get behind on. It's a very, very valuable loan, and it's inexpensive. At the end of the year, you'll start paying roughly $740, $750 a month over the next 25 years. And when you go to exit, which most people will, you can simply pay it off. There's no prepayment penalty. So it's a very, very good loan. The second one most of you are familiar with is the Paycheck Protection Program. Use it wisely. Don't blow it. So use it to build working capital. There's another round right now in the congressional debate. They're actually debating, the National Restaurant Association is working very diligently on the industry's behalf to extend some of these programs. One of them, the EIDL, they're trying to get some more money going that direction to extend it out. With the PPP, they're working with Congress on a new bill. Both the House and the Senate have it right around $120 billion. So that's about what we'll be working with. The overall qualification right now is your sales would need to be down at this point for Q2 or Q1. It was started at 50%. I think they've got it down to 35 or perhaps 30% now, being off prior year. And they're also working on the affiliation rules to make sure that groups can get these. The caveat there is if you got a great big loan the first time, it's going to be limited to $10 million together between the first and the second loan. And there'll be lots more detail to come, I'm sure, after we've all applied for the loans, as the first one went. It's a bit of a sarcasm there. So this time I think it's going to be more organized. The last thing is the SBA debt relief. And a lot of you that have SBA loans have had the luxury of having 6 months of paid principal and interest for your SBA loan. If you are in the market and can qualify for a new loan, it's not a bad strategy when you consider if you got a new loan before the end of September, somewhere around September 27th, I believe this closes up, you're able to get a new loan, you would have 6 months paid for you. So essentially 6 months out of your 7 years, if it was a 7-year loan, you'd have paid for you. And that can give you quite a bit of runway. So I like the combination of all three of these programs. There's a couple more that people have brought up. One's the Restart. The second is the Restaurant Act of 2020. In a conference with the National Restaurant Association, they said that really the thing that is being focused on is that next round of PPP. So Restaurant Act of 2020 was introduced in June and really hasn't gotten much traction since. So we'll have to swing around to that a little bit later after this PPP is launched, the next round, which we expect sometime in September if they can get along and get a deal worked out. Number 2 is to negotiate agreements. First place to start is with your rent. So you have to understand what the landlord's best alternative to a negotiated agreement is. In other words, what is it going to cost the landlord if you decide that you're going to exit or you're going to close down? That becomes your negotiation point. A lot of the landlords, they have a big nut to cover as well. So you have to understand their percentage, their position, and then try to work together as partners on the same deal. So the most advantageous thing that we've been able to negotiate so far is really a percentage rent. If you can get straight percentage rent, that's great, because if sales are zero, you don't pay any rent. Landlords are really hesitant around that, but we have had a few that have said, we understand what's going on. We're in the same boat in some of our properties, so percentage rent is fine. At a minimum, you'll end up covering their common area maintenance, their triple nets, and then asking for a percentage rent deal. And if you can get that negotiated through 2021, I think it would be greatly advantageous. Second area is procurement. So take a look at all of your vendors and consolidate them down. Many of you may have done this already, but the more product that you buy from one vendor, the likelihood the better your pricing is going to be. So consolidate your vendors. Look at your third-party delivery fees, because those need to be negotiated down. As their volume goes up, you'll get more leverage with them and an opportunity to negotiate those third-party delivery fees. The last thing is, don't forget about your vendors. Don't forget about payment plans with them. So while you consolidate and may move away from certain vendors, you did incur those costs, and you do need to end up paying those off. And that's one of the reasons that I like the SBA loans, is that it gives you a little more freedom to pay those, especially the EIDL loan. Another area is credit card processing. So the Hospitality Association, in coordination with US Bank, has an incredible credit card processing. Pricing really can't be beat. In fact, when I talk to bankers and when they offer to do merchant processing, they often ask me if I've slipped a zero, because it's interchange plus a penny and a half and 0.03% plus $10 a month. So it's an amazing program. It's very, very inexpensive, and pricing is very hard to beat on that. I don't believe I've ever had anybody beat that price. So the credit card processing through the Hospitality Association is a great program. If you're not on it, you should get on it. If you are prohibited because perhaps you've got a POS system that is tied to credit card processing, I would go back to the credit card processor through the POS company and see if you can negotiate lower rates with them. And if you can't, you should also do an audit of those fees. We've caught several times with POS companies, they say they're going to match fees, and then we do an audit. In fact, they'll do an audit for you. In some cases, we found that they haven't lived up to their commitment, and it's simply left pocket, right pocket, where sales maybe has one thing going on and accounting maybe has another. So communication there. Next is debt service, working with your bank or your investors to get relief. Some banks have provided 100% relief for 6 months or so. It's time to go back to them and start working on at least the next 3 months, as well as forbearance. So forbearance is primarily relief of the principal, and you continue to pay the interest. It's a very beneficial thing if you can work with your lender. And oftentimes they'll add it to the back of the loan, and that's the preferable side. Obviously, if they just let you out of it is the best case, but if they add it to the back, there's no punitive penalty in the recovery period. I've seen some deals by banks where they would say, we're going to give you 6 months of relief, but we're going to amortize those over 2021, or we're going to re-amortize it over the rest of the loan. Preferably just stretch that loan out a little bit, but there needs to be some adjustment in working with the banks. The last piece is on insurance. So make sure you understand what's needed on insurance. You have had sales that have been declining, and you have employees, smaller workforce. So both of those need to be adjusted in your insurance rates. And most policies will allow you to do that pretty much at any time, at a minimum every quarter. So make sure you're meeting with your broker and discussing insurance and making adjustments to those to reduce your premiums. But I will tell you, we are seeing a big uptick in rates considering any kind of employees. So we're starting to see a lot of lawsuits around employees. Some new legislation that's coming in is trying to protect the businesses from lawsuits, because we really can't track where people got sick. But we're starting to see some lawsuits pop up, and that is causing a lot of angst for the insurance companies. So they're really jacking those rates up. So expect to see lower overall dollars out of your pocket, but a higher dollar percentage spend on anything to do with employee insurance. Third area is to engineer your business, and right at the top there it says get the business to break even or better. That is a very lofty task when you have got declining sales of 30 to 70%, but you can do it. And if your EBITDA, if your cash flow or your cash contribution before you pay rent is negative, it's better to remain closed. So if you don't have any PPP money, it's better to remain closed until those sales can turn around. Because if you're losing money before you pay the rent and then you have to pay the rent on top, it's just compounded. So the first area that I would focus on is product. And if you notice these 4 little panels here, during the 2008 recession, there was a whole talk of certain companies that were going to be, going dead. And the ones that were smart figured out that if you work on these 4 areas, you can turn around your company. And if you watch any of these kind of, restaurant rescue or bar rescue or anything, they always do the same thing. Same thing. First, they work on the product. Then they work on the service. Then they work on the facility. The last piece that I wish that they would work on would be the systems, because that's what McDonald's did when they worked their way out of a turnaround earlier in the 2000s. They really focused on their systems. But around product, you want to make sure that you're engineering your menu to maximize gross margin, then percentage. The trap is to go after and try to get a cheap food cost or a cheap alcohol cost. What you need now is margin. So you want to maximize your gross margin dollars. Sell things you make money on. So if you sell a $30 steak and you make $15, or you sell a $15 pasta and you make $13.50, you're going to want to take the 15 bucks. We're in that spot right now where we really need to be taking margin over percentage, because that will offset on the labor side. So consolidate all of your products into a minimum number of products. Make sure you've got great crush utilization, because you really need to keep your inventory to a minimum, This is not a time for you to build inventory. It's a time for you to sell inventory. So we'll talk a little bit later about using the checkbook, but keep your inventory to a minimum. And make sure that everything you have offers value from the product side, because you want anybody that purchases your products, you want them to come back. And right now, people have to feel value because we've seen a tremendous switch into grocery shopping. So we've lost a lot of market share to grocery stores. So we have to make sure that whatever you offer as a restaurant, we already know it's going to be more expensive than the grocery store. They just don't have to do the work when they take it home or they have it delivered. So make sure that you're offering value with any kind of product that you set forward. Second area there is under service. So flawlessly execute the service model. If you've got anybody coming to your restaurant, flawlessly execute that and hold your third-party delivery platform to flawless service model as well. So watch your Yelps, watch anything that has a review, and hold people accountable around a flawlessly executed service model. Create experiences with every interaction. That is, if you have outdoor dining, make sure it is the best outdoor dining that it can be and it reflects your brand. The last area under service is speed of execution. It's never been more important to give the guest the opportunity to have their experience in their hands by being fast. So pace the guest. If they are ordering online or they're ordering takeaway, make sure they can get it very quickly. And I know that's a challenge because all the orders typically come in at once, but you've got to be able to kick those orders out. You can't have somebody call for an order and say it'll be ready in an hour and a half, which is what we saw a lot when we first went into this whole thing. So building speed is of utmost importance. So make sure that if you need to staff a little heavier to get product out, that you do that. Under facilities, one of the challenges that we have is that it's not particularly nice here on any given day through the fall, the winter, or the spring. So you have to be prepared to have 3-season outdoor dining. So some kind of cover, and the governor's mandate is only 2 walls. So you have to be conscious of that when you set up your 3-season dining area, that there can only be 2 walls. So unless he makes changes to that, you're going to have to leave a little bit of space between the building and some walls. So you have to kind of offset that. Make sure that you're maximizing your kitchen and your dining room utilization. Since we've had to close half the dining room, and in some cases more than that, many businesses have decided to begin to infringe on that space, rearrange it, infringe upon that space, and give it a little more kitchen utilization so that they can build more takeout business, or make the takeout business or the delivery business a little more effective by cornering off areas of the restaurant that were otherwise used when the dining room was full. So using your facility to the maximum to maximize sales is key. Consider air purification. This will be a big request, I think, in the future. I think it's a great marketing area, but it's expensive. So really looking for good air purification. The industry is getting kind of a bad rap that, dining in restaurants, potentially spreading COVID or at least coronavirus. So you want to make sure you have nice, clean air and you're moving that air through that facility. Temperature scanning is another thing. So one of the complexities with temperature scanning is what do you do with the prep people when they come in before the managers? We've seen a couple of times where prep is coming in early in the morning. They perhaps have 2 different jobs and they've been affected and they spread the disease. So there are standing temperature scanning technologies that would allow them to check in and for you to be alerted. Not cheap, $1,500 to $2,000, $3,000 in some cases, but better than having a case and having to close down for the day. Again, back to the reason that you might want to have an EIDL loan is that you could purchase something like this to help keep from being hurt as a business. Clean, clean, clean. I think we've had our full portion of being clean at this point. Cleanliness is absolutely key, and anybody that comes in your restaurant has got to be able to eat off any surface. And make sure your restaurant has street appeal. So when people drive by, because traffic's sped up a little bit, make sure that it catches the eye, that people know that you're there, so that it plants that seed that they perhaps might order from you or try your restaurant at some point. So facilities, make sure they're clean and they have great street appeal, and think about your guest experience inside, because you want them to feel very, very safe. Last area is near and dear to my heart, and that is the systems area. So reservation systems, most benefit by having reservations rather than just drop in. People don't drop into restaurants a lot anymore. They want to know that their seat is ready to go. So they're wanting to make reservations online. So, or even call in some cases, but most of the time they want to make their reservations online. So make sure you have a great reservation system that you own the data. Don't give the data away. So there are some popular reservation systems that they want to own the data, and if you ever leave them, you leave that data behind, and you want to be able to mine that data and own it. So make sure that you work with a reservation system that you own the data. Second area is financial. So you want to make sure that you've got great financial systems, because you have to have great information coming to you every day, every week, and every period. Communications, really about how do you get your message out? How do you communicate with your people, whether that be through platforms such as Microsoft Teams or Zoom or another platform like that, as well as a written platform with your guests as well. So this allows you also to do some pretty nifty stuff around if you're going to make some food and you're going to do a kit or something like that, you can actually make a video, and that would help you talk to the guest on the other side and create experience for them. They're working with you and creating or finishing off that kit that you've sold to them. So great opportunity. Look into communication systems. They're key to the future. And then your overall tech stack, that's your computers and all of your IT areas. Those have got to be scrubbed up, sharpened up, and renewed as you engineer your business. Fourth area, plan and forecast. Another area that is very near and dear to my heart. Protect cash. In fact, I should put that on every slide, because cash is king here. We cannot let the cash get drained out whatsoever. So you're going to want to forecast for the next 3 months, kind of line by line, and then estimate the following 3 and get into March. We've got to get to March. So the following 3, because we don't know what's going to happen through the winter, those can be kind of high level projections, but for the next 3 months, you should be more detailed in your forecast. You've got to protect cash. So back to making sure that you're making money before you pay rent, your forecast is going to help you do that. Then you can use it in a kind of a forward-looking offensive management style. I've got a buddy that wrote the evacuation procedures for Columbia Tower. And if there was not any procedures to get out of that building, it could be an absolute disaster. So it's really about creating the results that they want rather than just letting them happen. So it's a great example in that case. It also allows you, when you're forecasting, to dominate your costs, because you know where you want them to be and control your business, and not vice versa. Planning and forecasting also allows you to run your business forward. So you can anticipate expenditures because you will have some small things pop up, as we've seen with restaurants closing, opening, closing, opening, closing. We've seen a lot of awful strange things happen, such as ice machines that are used to being on all the time don't work anymore, walk-ins go down, pieces of equipment fail. So when you're running your business forward and you're planning your forecasting, that actually allows you to put something aside for those expenditures rather than just getting clobbered by them every other period, or every period in some cases. Build a habit of forecasting and do that by day. And in a lot of cases, you're going to need to do it by hours. You're going to constantly want to be kind of evaluating your hours, because they shift pretty dramatically, and we're in for a big shift here. We don't know what it's going to look like when school starts up. We do know that school, in the vast majority, is not going to go back. It is going to start online. So that's going to cause some issues around hourly sales. So this is going to be a huge opportunity, I believe, for those first couple of weeks of class as parents are kind of worn out by trying to figure out what to do. And they've got pods going on, and they're sharing each other's houses and doing small classes and all of those kind of things. And it's a good opportunity to have dinner made for them in these kits that can be assembled, or offering some takeaway food. But I think there's going to be a pretty good demand, and you've got to get out in front of it and market. School's going to start up here in the next week or so. So you're going to want to get out and market pretty heavily your kits for those first couple of weeks of school, and build those into your forecast. And you're going to want to discuss your forecast every week with your team. So compare them to the goals that you've set out, see what's going well and what isn't. Use those for purchasing and scheduling. Again, absolutely do not build inventory, because we don't know if there could be a shutdown at any point, and you don't want to be, or a reduction in dining, and we don't want to be sitting on a bunch of inventory. So only order what you need, with keeping in mind your vendors have expenses too, and they will become more expensive if you have to order 7 days a week. So back to consolidating your vendors, buying more product from fewer vendors is definitely the best strategy during this time. And be nimble and pivot. So if there are adjustments, make sure you use the work share program for the state, or furlough, or reduce down to limited service if you need to. So be nimble and pivot. That is the key to all of this. We've seen a lot of really great things happen, and a lot of things that didn't work as people tried to pivot. So plan and forecast, how will you pivot if there is another reduction, and let's say they take away indoor dining altogether. I don't know that they will, but if they did, what then over the next couple of months? So make sure you have contingency plans and forecast for those things. So
Rick, I have a question on the inventory part.
Yeah.
Right now, we're seeing in a lot of our supply chains shortages of different ingredients. And that's making it a challenge to perhaps consolidate with one or two vendors. For example, in the pizza industry, there's a shortage of meat products, especially pepperoni. And I know in other sectors, there's other shortages. How does one navigate that challenge at the same time trying to consolidate their vendors and their processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what you want to do is you want to meet with that vendor and make sure that you are a priority. So if the vendor is honest up front, you can source another vendor. If you can't consolidate your vendors, you can't consolidate them. But sometimes we see, we buy cheese from this person, and we buy mushrooms from that person, and we buy over here and we buy over there, and some of those products can be consolidated into one vendor. But meeting with your vendors on a regular basis, not just the sales people, but just get to the core of the procurement people and make sure that you have an understanding of how much capacity those vendors have and what they see coming. That's been some of the most helpful things as we have gone into this. For example, we may have had a shortage early on certain cuts of meat, and we were able to pivot because we work with the meat vendors. We were able to pivot to different cuts. Maybe not as luxurious, maybe not as great, but you can come up with great recipes for certain cuts of meat. So working with the vendors in anticipation, they know what's coming. Their supply chain is a lot further out than ours is. We pick up the phone, we order a lot of times, where they have to procure things, they have to have it shipped in. They know a shortage is coming. So working with them to make sure that you're covered is going to be the key to this whole thing. All right, number 5, fundamental routines. One thing that happened to us during this pandemic is that we kind of lost sight. We got knocked back on our heels and we got out of our disciplines. So in a lot of cases, and this is a chance right now to get back into those disciplines. So making sure that you've got timely, relevant, accurate data at appropriate intervals. And right now, you really need to have a BI tool or a POS that gives you data on a daily, weekly, and period basis. And those should include the hours of the day. So making sure that you've got that data in your hand every day, because as I mentioned, over the next couple of weeks, schedules are going to shift. And it happens every year in September. The cliff comes, we don't think it's going to happen this year because we've had some kind of disruption, and it does. Now, the only thing that I can say is a few years ago when we had the strikes, the teacher strikes, we did see an elongation of that cliff. So rather than it just dropping off the week after Labor Day, as it typically does, or perhaps the next week, it actually elongated a little bit further into September, but ultimately dropped out. And a lot of that has to do with outdoor dining or the weather as well. But for the most part, you're going to need to anticipate that there's going to be a drop, and you need good data to be able to do that. Back to forecasting, make sure that when you have that forecast, you use your daily checkbook. And what that is here's how much cash I have to spend, here's what I can buy. And one of the people that I think was really scrappy when he started up his restaurants told me at one point, people have forgot how to cook. He said, when I started my restaurant, I would go to the refrigerator at the walk-in and I would figure out what I had and I would design my menu around that for the night, rather than simply having to fill up the walk-in and have products sitting around. So using a daily checkbook. So for example, if you have, I'm going to use some easy math here. If you have $20,000 of sales scheduled for the week and you're open for 5 days of that week, you're going to do $4,000 a day. Some of you are saying, boy, wouldn't that be nice again? But $4,000, and let's say you're running a 30% food cost. Your 30% food cost on the $4,000, if let's say half of that was from food and half of it from beverage, say $2,000 worth of food, you have 30%, you have $600 to spend for that day. And that will keep you from building up too much inventory. Now, back to the question that was asked earlier, there may be things if your vendor says, hey, I see a shortage coming on certain products, you may want to stock up a little bit. Just don't get caught with products that are perishable, that you can't store if something happens. Costed schedules are simply that. Before you run any shifts for that week, you are to sit down with your schedule and cost it out. Person by person, how much is it going to cost you and what is your labor going to run that week? And then you track that every day. Who worked? How much did they make? And what did it cost me? With the goal of really keeping the prime cost at 60% or less, I know it's going to raise some eyebrows, but we have plenty of people that are doing that at this point. So you want to keep that prime cost at 60% or less. And some, if you're at 65, you better make sure that, or 65 or so, you're going to make sure that the rest of your operating expenses are very low and your rent's very low. Because with the sales hit, what's happened is that rent as a percentage of sales, if it's not negotiated, is skyrocketed, and any kind of fixed costs have skyrocketed as well. So utilities, you may notice your utilities are higher as a percentage of sales than they were before, because some of those things you're just keeping the lights on, or your internet's the same, or your telephone's the same. We have several different products that are line items that are fixed. So keeping your prime cost, do not let it seep into the 70s. If it gets 70% or more, you're going to lose money. It's just a fact. There's not enough room in the rest of the P&L to get away with it. So you cannot let your prime costs get into the 70s, and certainly not higher than that, or you'll really lose money. And then meet with your team every week to review sales and expenses and set the budget for the upcoming week. Make sure you're still doing your period reviews, that you're meeting with your team members and you're talking about your financials with them. I know that's dropped off a lot in a lot of cases, but it's time to pick that back up again so that we can share those great ideas as a team. And then you can ask yourself, do we have a guest traffic, guest average, or efficiency opportunity, or one or more? Number 6, this will be the key going forward. Delivery and pickup profitability. The landscape has changed. So going into this, we had been moving towards a food away from home of 53% compared to 40% at home. That's now reversed or on trend to have reversed. So it is now switched. We've lost about 6 points of variance there. So it's flipped around and gone the other direction. So as I mentioned earlier, safety of restaurants is being questioned during the pandemic. One interesting point is that we have a potential reduction in competition for all of you of probably 20%. That's my estimate. I've seen, it depends on how long this drags out, but I've seen estimates as high as 35% and as low as 10%. I still think it's going to be 20 to 25% of the restaurants. I think people are going to get just kind of tuckered out and tired of this and want to pack it in. What that does is it does free up sales for everybody that stays in business. So while we're sad to see restaurants go, they're going to, and those sales will go someplace because that 47% of food away from home will be made up. It's still going to be an opportunity for everybody that's remaining, the other 80% or so. So it's a lot of restaurants, and if that PPP doesn't come through fairly soon, we're going to see some real dire times for people. Part of what's pushing it is this 50% or more people working from home. What creates the anxiety for all the operators is there's no clear return to the office. So there's an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago that scared the life out of everybody, because they literally, 28% of the businesses that were surveyed said, we don't know when we're going back to the office. About half of them said, maybe next year. So only 8% of the workers are at work. So downtown areas have been devastated by that. Digital penetration, be everywhere and step on it. Back in the early 20th century, cold cereal had just kind of started coming on the scene. And then we had the Great Recession, or the Great Depression, sorry, not the Great Recession, Great Depression. And there were two companies that were kind of dominating the market at the time for cornflakes. One was Kellogg's and one was Post. And to this day, we have one dominant player. And the difference was Post did what most companies would do, and that was hit the brakes. Kellogg's doubled down, increased their marketing spend, decided to be everywhere, tried to do whatever they could to drive those sales, and as a result, took over that marketing position and being the dominant, having the market share. So my advice to you is to step on it. I think it's a great strategy. Step on it. Get out there. Be everywhere. Be on Twitter. Be on all the social. Have an active email platform. Have a great website platform that can link through to delivery service and to your own channel. Because there are not only the third-party deliveries, but there's the do-it-yourself, and there's alternative delivery. There's several companies that will come by your restaurant, pick it up, and deliver it. So that's at a much better price. So they might have a flat rate, and we've had pretty good luck with that in some of the bigger markets, using companies that will literally drop by your restaurant, pick up the goods, and keep going and deliver it to the guest. So that's an alternative. And you want to make sure in your delivery and your pickup profitability that you are building incremental check average, that you have add-ons. A lot of times when you go to a place like Amazon, you get the little pop-up that says people also enjoyed this, or people bought this together. Make sure that you have items that stick out, and maybe you can couple them together and buy and have them buy things like whole meals and kits as well. So food, beverage, and dessert. Dessert's often the ignored piece. So make sure that you are doing entire kits, because you can bump that check average up quite a bit, $5-10 easy by getting desserts in there. So you want to make sure that you focus on the entire check and track what you were tracking before at a check average, and make sure that you're driving that number up. Because a couple of bucks when you're eating at home is a lot different than a couple of bucks eating in a restaurant. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity to build check average, to get more for the same amount of labor, have higher sales. Make sure that those packages are accurate. And this goes back to what the CFO of McDonald's said back when they were doing their turnaround. It didn't matter if you had really fast, delicious food, if you put the wrong thing in the bag. So make sure that your packing is extremely accurate. I know it's a silly thing, but it happens more often than not when you don't get an item and you're at home. It really makes you kind of question ordering again. So you want to make that guest experience as good as possible. Last thing on there is ghost kitchens. So these ghost kitchens are going to be accelerated. We haven't seen quite the penetration of these yet, but we will. A lot of times they're in warehouse locations. They are offered low rent. They've got a central distribution point. So maybe they're in a SOTO type of area where they can get to 90, they can get to 5, they can pop down to 405, they can get throughout the city, they can get to the north and the south. So we'll start to see more of an emergence of those, and it's something to consider as you have your company and you think about how to sell more. You could also put a second brand under the same roof, because the food is coming from who knows where. So if it's coming out of your restaurant, you could also add a second brand. So I know, chicken sandwiches out of someplace that does really great burgers, and they can start specializing in certain things. Number 7 is to outsource non-operations. Now is a great time to outsource, because in this particular case, outsourcing brings you people that are specialized, they're experienced, and they're permanent. They don't come and go. You don't have to worry about career path with them. You're hiring companies to do these things, and you get back to doing what you do, which is really running operations. So oftentimes when you outsource, you get a much higher level of expertise than what you might be able to hire in-house, because people that are in-house just don't have the skills of an outsourcer, because you've got a variety of people on a team that all have different skill sets, and they're often equal or less expensive than having people in-house, and they can scale up or scale down. So if you close a location or you open a location, your pricing can go up and down. And it also gives you pooled resources and shared ideas, because outsourcers work with more than one company. They know good ideas when they're seen, and they can share those out. Maybe not the names of the people that are doing those things, but some of the ideas can be shared out, as long as they're not proprietary to the company. So great time to outsource. I think this is going to be the next really big thing that we see in all businesses, is much more outsourcing than insourcing. So people that are not having to look people in the eye and say, I'm sorry, I have to lay you off again, is a huge relief to a lot of operators. So we're fielding a lot of calls from people saying, I don't know if I want to go through this again with layoffs. I think I want to outsource. So it's a great time to outsource, and you should really strongly consider it as a strategy.
Rick, what are some of the best outsourcing non-operation ideas? I mean, accounting, financial operations for a restaurant. What are some of the restaurant or hotels? What are some of the best ways to leverage that concept?
Yeah, so I think the main areas. IT used to be a huge in-house thing. Everybody had IT. Now hardly anybody has IT. You want to make sure that you outsource your IT. Accounting, I think, is also an excellent area to do that. And marketing is another area that you should consider, because you're getting a team and not a person. And lastly, HR. I love our HR folks, but sometimes in a very complicated time like this, you need more resources on the HR side. And legal. Some people still have in-house counsel. As we've kind of stopped growth, maybe that isn't as necessary anymore. And again, you get more specialization by having your legal outsourced. So those are 5 pretty good areas that you should consider outsourcing. Then it's time for the essential strategic decisions. Now is a great time to buy. It doesn't seem like it, but if you've got capital, and some people do, now is a great time to buy a great location. So we will be back. This is for longer term thoughts, but it also allows you, if you've got a corporate infrastructure, if you've got an operations team, you can add another location for relatively inexpensive startup, and you can have another location that's producing sales, giving you more distribution points. There's going to be a lot of closed spaces. In fact, there are already. And we really need to be thinking about heading to the suburbs, because the downtown area is going to take a little bit longer to recover. And with the 50+% of people working at home, you're going to want to make sure that you're in the suburbs, because that's where the growth is going to start, is going to be in the suburbs when we begin to grow again, because people are really, they're already there. And they just wander down the street and go to a restaurant, pick something up, or dine in. You can also merge. So this would be where you've got two good companies, but because of what's happened, they've become weaker. And they've got infrastructure built already. So bringing them together, evaluating, if you've got a group of 5 to 10 restaurants and you've got somebody else that's got a group of 5 to 10 restaurants and you're both kind of struggling, might be an opportunity to merge those in. We're going to see an awful lot of this consolidation over the next year, where companies are joining together. Selling, time to exit. And I think this is really when you've kind of lost the passion for the business and you just don't want to deal with it anymore, and you want to kind of simplify things. It's not a terrible time to exit. You're going to take a little bit of a discount right now, but the earlier that, if you're ready to sell, now would be the time. Don't wait until winter in Seattle, because then you'll have less sales coming in, and it'll be harder to sell. So now's a good time to exit if you're thinking about selling. Some people have asked me about workouts. Workouts are right next to bankruptcy. They kind of put you right in the same type of situation, but you're negotiating with banks and vendors about reduced payments, or in fact, some kind of forgiveness with them. So you're going back to your vendors and you're saying, I can pay you 30 cents on the dollar. Or you go into your bank and say, I want to clear up this, maybe it's $100,000 worth of debt. I can pay you 30 and we're going to be out, or something like that. And we'll get it off the books, but I can't continue to bleed every month and pay these high payments. So workouts put you in kind of a special class, but it will clear your balance sheet off. Bankruptcy is an option I've been asked about. There's Chapter 11 reorganization. That's when you basically file bankruptcy protection and you're protected from your vendors. And there are certain things that can still get at you. You're going to want to make sure that you've got things paid for, your payroll taxes and things that you're personally liable for, because you're not going to get out of those. But it is an option, but it is an option at last resort. Chapter 7 is just an opportunity to just liquidate, because you need protection from your creditors. And so you'd liquidate and you'd walk away at that point. And then there's simply closing and handing in the keys. Going to your landlord and say, I can't do this anymore. You hand in the keys, you close up shop, let everybody go, and you move on. And that's an option. And working with some of the landlords, I say, what do you do about personal guarantees? And most of them said, what am I supposed to do? Go take their house. So, personal guarantees have some bite if you have assets. If you don't have a lot of assets, personal guarantees don't hold a lot of weight. They can file, actions against you, but most are not going to bother, I don't believe. So it's a sad place when you get to that point. All right. Questions?
All right, so we've got one question here. How much do we invest in marketing activities? Should we cut back advertising or marketing that are non-digital, such as Valpak, Red Plum, and those types of things?
Oh, discounting. Yeah, well, you'd have to evaluate how much of that was good for you to begin with. If you don't see a lot of action on there, it's good to cut back, not cut out. So choose the platforms that work best for you. But I would really be dumping my money more towards being really proactive and pushing out messages on a really frequent basis and creating a lot of noise compared to, you know, a Valpak or something along that line. I much prefer the social aspect over the traditional coupon. I just don't know how successful each restaurant is, varies, but for the most part, putting your money towards shouting your message right now and showing people what you're doing to keep them safe and to bring them in, I think is much more important than sending out a Valpak or something along that line. So I would spend more money on the other side for sure.
Okay, so not necessarily cutting back on advertising, just reallocating.
Yeah, reallocating. Yeah. Back to the Kellogg's, they actually doubled their marketing when they went into the Great Depression because they realized that that's the only way out. And I think that we're all going to see margin compression, and the only way to do that is to get more market share. And I think that's what people need to focus on is focus on getting market share, not what's necessarily going on around you, but capturing market share and making sure that you're the one that people go to. Because at the end of the day, you want to have a last man standing. That was a very popular saying during the Great Recession was you want to be the last man standing. If there's going to be one company left, you want to be it.
Okay. Follow up to that with that idea of continuing the messages to your customers and potential customers, how viable is discounting now with the additional cost pressures that are in there? Should we focus more of our efforts on overall messages, contests, other incentives for customer engagement as opposed to 20% off, 10% off, buy one, get one off?
Yeah, I think another great question, because I'm not a big discounting person. Anybody that's worked with me knows that I don't like discounting. I like offering more. So rather than discount, I'd rather offer more value. So bundling things together to get more value to the guest, even if you were to add them all together, you know, kind of a value meal thing, where you're taking a little bit of a discount on each product, but you're selling more product is the preferred way to go. So I'm not a big discounting fan. I don't think it's going to drive a lot of traffic right now. Pizza always, you know, discounting pizza is just the way it is, always has been, probably never change. But for most other industries, discounting, I'm not a big fan of. I much prefer to offer more value to get that higher check. So you can drive incremental check average by bundling things together rather than offering discount. Because I don't think that offering a discount is going to drive a lot of traffic right now.
Okay. Another question in relation to one of the things that you brought up earlier, ghost kitchens. What are some examples of successful ghost kitchens that you've seen implemented?
Well, we haven't seen a ton of them in Seattle yet, in this area. I think more nationally, we've seen a lot of, for lack of a better term, like pizza concepts that have gone to chicken wings and things like that. Those have been concepts that have been pretty good. Kind of producing another product out of the same house. It's, I think, still early on in the ghost kitchen world, but we're going to have an awful lot of inventory on the market with kitchens. So doesn't mean you have to open up and operate a full service restaurant. You can use those spaces as long as they're small and kitchen is the primary driver of the footprint and you don't have a lot of rent. You can use those to launch. And it's really about getting penetration in the market and spreading your product in places that it couldn't ordinarily go. For example, if you're in one area of the city and your restaurant is in another area of the city, the guest is in one area and they can't get your product, having a ghost kitchen closer to them, provided that it's affordable and it's a small footprint. In some cases, you can even ship product into those locations for production. It can be very lucrative because you don't have the overhead of the entire staff. It works better if you've already got an infrastructure than trying to start from scratch. Although if you start from scratch, you don't have any infrastructure, you don't have any expense, nothing to cover. It's a good way to get in, a low cost, cheap way to get into the industry. And that's why you see, we see a lot of food trucks. So food trucks are just, they're just ghost kitchens on wheels.
All right. Those are all the questions I have. Any final thoughts, Rick?
Well, I think we're in an incredible cycle of fear and opportunity. So if you can rally the troops, stay positive through all of this. Leadership is about staying positive through these times because people need confidence. And if you are able to impart that you still want to grow, you still want to grow those parts of the company that can be grown out, you still want to grow that top line, even from a baseline that's a lot lower, that you still want to help people, that you still want to serve the community. That's a very inspirational message, and it spreads. And we didn't get into this industry to just cook and serve. We got into this restaurant to impact communities, into this industry to impact communities. So having a positive, confident message to your people will get out into the community, and it'll breed more confidence into the community that you're there to stay. So be confident, be positive, stay the course, fight, and lastly, protect cash.
Well, thank you very much, Rick. We're going to make a replay of this available over the next day or so. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be available at hub.wahospitality.org. And Rick, can we make the PowerPoint available to the folks as well so they can follow along?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. We will make that available in the replays as well. So with that, thank you, Rick, so much for your time. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.